You can waste years trying to figure leadership out on your own, years falling behind, years not knowing why you aren't getting the results you expect. Nowadays, there's more leadership content than ever, and most firefighters and officers are drowning in it and still not making progress. That's why we created the Fireground Company membership. This membership isn't for everyone. It's for firefighters and officers who refuse to be average. Once you join, you gain access to the Insider Podcast, Leadership Q&A, where we answer the questions you submit to us, discussion feeds, private resources, exclusive discounts, and more. Right now, we have a founding member discount for the first 50 members to join. Visit firegroundcompany.com before this offer is gone.
Today's episode of the Fireground Company podcast, we discuss data, measurement, and management, and its effect on the fire department.
The Fireground Company podcast.
All right. I've had a lot of coffee today because we're recording a little later than we normally do, and we also, people probably don't know this, a little insight into our world on the podcast here is we usually, I think most of the time, record coming off of shift. So we're both leaving the firehouse together and we go to our little studio and record. So we're usually pretty beat up from the night before and everything. Well, today because of scheduling and everything, we are in the middle of our long break and we're recording. So I woke up at home this morning and drank probably 3/4 of a pot of coffee at my house and then came to our studio and then made another pot and drank more. So I'm all hopped up on caffeine and ready to go. And we've got a good episode today. We've been we talk about this concept almost daily, I think, and it is because it works. This whole thought process has worked its way into our daily lives operating in the fire department. And also at this point, I think it's fair to say the way that the fire department in general, I think across the nation, operates at sort of an administrative level. And that is a concept that is summed up in one word, and that's data. And some people will call it metrics and evaluations and spreadsheets and all these things, but really what it is data. And I think part of that is because we have our ability to measure things has grown, and so I don't want to make a blanket statement from the beginning and say that it is a bad thing, but the way we use it, I think, has become a bad thing. Data in itself, measuring things and doing something with that information can actually be, a really positive thing. And of course, we've grown in our ability to do that in the fire department. But I think we're at a point right now where we've hit critical mass and it's gone haywire. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm going to complain a little.
Okay.
I'm going to commiserate, maybe make you feel better. Because if you're dealing with this, you understand other people are dealing with the same thing. And then at the end of this, I just want to talk about some ways to deal with this because it's not going away. You're going to deal with like data or people using it to leverage it, pros and cons and different, whatever. So you got to kind of understand what you're dealing with. And it just kind of, I don't know, man, it can get people on the wrong track.
Do you actually have ways of dealing with it?
I think so, yeah.
All right. Well,
I think you have to, yes, you have to deal with it in a certain way. I'm not saying you're going to fix everything,
right?
But there's ways of thinking about it at the highest levels. And I think at our level, interacting with it to maybe sometimes even help the people above you understand what they're dealing with. So at the end, I kind of want to jump into that, but maybe, a little commiserating, get that out of your system, a little rah-rah for too much computer data and stuff like that. So,
okay.
And point out, really, just pointing out the some of the, I think the misunderstandings of it and problems with it, because if you don't understand the problems, then you're not going to be able to solve the problem. So I guess you just want me to jump into it?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. And I think we see it in a lot of different things. I mean, you see it in your data for calls, I'm sure, or you see it in maybe training, depending on what you're using it for. And that kind of becomes the issue, really, is like how we're using it. I mean, I'm jumping off for me, I just want to stuff like these accreditation, right? This is kind of, maybe not 100% data, but it does tie into it, where you have these organizations that do accreditation or different things like, the ISO and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, how do you get those? How do you get accreditation? How do you get those ISO ratings? It's very focused on data, like the collection of it, and talking about our resources and times we show up. I mean, if you look, I don't know everything about it. I'm not saying I do, how the accreditation stuff works or the ISO stuff works, but a lot of times I hear people say that, oh, you're doing this for ISO or credit. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you should explain that to me a little more. And then when you look at it, like the accreditation stuff is weird to me, man. I mean, it's really weird to me because like when you look at that stuff, this is the thing is, when I look at a department that's accredited and a department that is not, is there really a difference that you can tell?
Absolutely not.
No, there really isn't. Is there? And we went through the process. Is there a big difference between prior to us being accredited and after us being accredited?
Yeah, I don't want to.
I mean,
I don't want to say, but
no, I mean, but I'm saying, is it?
Worse.
It's fine, but it's not noticeable, right? So why are we doing it? And a lot of the stuff, when you start looking at it,
yeah. And I don't want to blow this whole thing out of the water and just give the punchline before it's all over. But it's because the measurement and the data is divorced from reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and there's an old saying, and we'll probably have a couple of good, sayings from the entrepreneurial world or whatever that come into this episode. But one of them that I know is what gets measured gets managed. And in some cases that's positive, right? There's a positive spin to that, which is like once you start, so people talk about it with fitness, keeping logs and stuff like that. So that if you measure your progress, it gets managed and you can actually see progress, things like that, right? That's the positive side of it. Here's the negative side of it, which is when something gets measured, it almost, the administrative world wants to now manage it. So as soon as it's measured and you have the data of it, it needs to get managed. At least that's what they think. And that's sort of what started happening. And here's another thing, and I just want to point this out. I don't want to derail you, but there's another thing, which is, and we see this a lot, and it sort of could probably be its own episode, which is taking cues from the wrong places. So taking cues from the corporate world or something like that. And, or you get these cross industry things. And sometimes that's positive. Sometimes it's not. And I've talked to you before. We've talked about this, about accreditation and how it is necessary in certain places. So my wife is a teacher, and in the education world, accreditation is completely necessary because you have one place that starts a school, right? And they say, we're a school and we'll teach you all the things you need to know. And then you have another place that starts a school and, they say the same thing. How do you know which one is really going to take care of your educational needs? Well, you have to they have to pass a certain level so that not everybody can just say, hey, we're a school, right? And I think there's other things where accreditation is necessary. Banks, we talk about, you don't want to have a bank that's not accredited by some body that said that, okay, this is a real bank and you can trust it and we're putting our name on it. But that's not really how it works in the fire department. It doesn't cross industries like that, where they're taking cues from these other industries where it is necessary, and they're trying to force, this square peg in a round hole and say accreditation, if it works in all these other industries, works here too. And it just feels strange. It feels like, and like you said, that and maybe this is a lack of understanding on my part. I don't really understand what accreditation is.
Isn't that the problem though? Yeah. How if it's such an important thing though, shouldn't we all understand what it is? I don't think I would love to. I would say 99% of the firefighters on the street could not explain to you what it is and what its benefits are. That's a problem, man.
What its benefits are.
Yeah, that's a problem. I mean,
what are its benefits?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's, and this is a little different than data here, but it does tie into it too. Because it's when you're getting, I guess, some kind of certification or accreditation, or it's measuring something, right? But
Yes.
what do these things measure? And, what does it actually show? I mean, it's kind of like college degrees are another thing where there's so many college degrees now. Years ago, there wasn't. It was more like engineering and I don't know, whatever, accounting. It was more these kind of easier to define. But what happened is now there's all these different degrees and you can say, oh, I have a college degree. And it's like, okay, well, but what does that mean anymore? You don't really know unless you ask them. And even if you have a degree in the same thing, if these schools are accredited, doesn't really count for much, right? This person could be a lot better than this person. So I think the problem is it's the data and accreditation of whatever has become this whole industry where you're trying to sell it to everyone. When if you're trying to sell it to everyone, what happens? The standard is going to diminish to some degree. And that's what happens with some of this stuff. Like, so accreditation, I find interesting. It's there's a lot of data of how, you go about it and how you get these ratings and all this other stuff. I mean, you can get accredited also as an officer, I think maybe even as a firefighter, I can't remember. But does that mean anything? We know accredited officers, right, that are not good. We know accredited officers that are good.
It means something to the people that work for the accreditation.
Yeah, but it's exactly,
they get paid.
Exactly. But it doesn't mean anything to most people because we know both sides of that. You see ones that are really good that are accredited.
But here we go. This is the thing.
So it doesn't do anything.
Of course not, because it's devoid
Yes.
of reality. It's so, and again, like, especially in our, and I hate to be, so basic, but look at our job. Okay. At the end of the day, our job is to put fires out and help people who are injured or sick. That's our job. And we've been doing that for many years without being accredited by a certifying body. And our job gets so real, where there's a house on fire and you show up, and we've been putting them out for years and nobody's stopping us at the door saying, wait, are you guys accredited?
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so this accreditation is based on some sort of administrative, governmental thing that I'm just bureaucratic, if you will, that I'm not aware of. And if I don't know, if somebody is listening to this and they have a better grasp of it, please weigh in. But I don't get it. Yeah.
So, taking a look to it, like, what is the ISO stuff that, I guess all these companies are getting into it now. There's, whatever, I guess, I don't know, Vector Solutions is a big one, but there's a bunch of them that just measure this stuff, right? They just measure the training, but the problem is the quality of the training that you input. You have categories for this training, but they use this stuff for ISO, but it really doesn't mean anything if at the end of the day. I mean, and then some of the numbers, when you start crunching them, it's really impossible to do quality training, right? You I forget, one day I was starting to take these numbers and look at them, and it was something crazy, like the number of shifts that we work. And if everyone shows up to work every single day, you had to do 2 hours of solid suppression training every day. You're like, okay, maybe in a way that doesn't sound hard, but what really is it? What are we actually, and we're doing that every day. You have a heavy call volume day. You have other training scheduled that doesn't fit into the right categories. So you get all these, we've accomplished this, we got this, but what does it really mean? I mean, you could have the best ISO rating in the world. You still could have terrible firefighters and companies that show up. I don't, we run a lot of mutual aid. We're around a lot of other people. It's all over the place. And at certain points, different departments had better ISO rating, and you look into all that stuff and it's it meant nothing. They could show up and some of their companies were terrible and some of them good. So you start having data that measures things. But the problem is those are, I guess, two big examples of, at the highest of the highest levels for, I guess, the nation and departments, that they don't really tell you much about the departments, but a lot of times we bow down to them and we're so focused on them. And I get there's other stuff tied in, probably grants and all these other things, but I don't know, man. I don't think it's a good way to do business. And I mean, now drilling down into some other stuff, again, data and stuff. I mean, CPR was another interesting thing. I mean, and we found this over the last few years where people would come and different things we would try, and they would say, okay, well, this gets a 20%, 30% CPR save rate. And you're like, 20, 30%? What? That doesn't happen. We think about it's like 20, so 30%. So out of 10 CPRs you're doing, you're getting 2 to 3 saves. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen, man. And then you find out, here we go, data's being manipulated. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm not saying it's nefarious reasons, but it's not presenting the whole picture, right? Because they're saying, oh, there's a criteria for savable people. So we're going to take 100 CPRs. There's really only, I don't know, whatever number it is, or 1,000. And it's like this number, this 100 out of 1,000, we're considering savable. And then out of that 100, it's whatever it is, 10, 12, whatever those numbers may be. But you don't present the whole picture, and you're like, okay, so really it's the savable rate's like 0.01 or something like that. And you're like, okay, that lines up about with real life because you know what I mean? It's stuff like that, but then we'll focus on trying to take that number and we'll focus all our training around that.
That's correct. Yeah.
And it's like, something seems off here. I mean, and we can just keep going down. There's different things, and it infects everything if you think about it. And we talked about this before on the training episode, timing. Timing is one of those things, right? That's data. Timing. It's
measurable.
Yeah, and
measurable.
A lot of people get obsessed with timing things. But you can't time everything equally. And I don't know if I'm even saying that right, but I said it before on that episode where I can time you masking up just at the point you're ready to mask up, right? Because that's controlled. It's a controlled moment, right? But stretching a hose line from here to there in any kind of real situation where there's obstacles and everything else going on and all these, talking and confusion and communication, that is much harder to get, a number that actually is meaningful. Mm-hmm. We all know, we can see, and this is the problem. This is why actually seeing it versus just the numbers in that situation, it needs to be reversed, right? So deploying a line, if you want to figure out how good a company is, you could say, all right, well, they're really fast, but I know that company's really fast because they're cutting all these corners. If anything is off, it's not going to work right. Well, real life, there's almost always something off. Mm-hmm. And that company's reputation is when they show up, they're a mess. But they can do it real fast in training, mm-hmm. which is good, I guess. But then this other company maybe is a little slower. And you're like, okay, well, why are they slower? It's because they're a little more methodical. They're ready for the audible. They're ready for, and I can see that. I can't measure that though.
You can't measure that, right? And so the other thing is repeatability, right? Yeah. That company that's moving methodically, systematically. We talk about that mm-hmm. a lot, systems. And I hope we'll get more into that in another episode of, how a quality system can trump almost anything. But that's what they're doing. They're implementing a system, and that's repeatability. You can't measure repeatability. Well, I guess you could but you know what I mean? In our job, the variables, it's more complicated. Exactly.
It's much more complicated.
It's more complicated. And that, I think you nailed something important about this whole thing, is that what we tend to measure is what's easy to measure. And that's not necessarily, here's the thing is you can measure. Not everything that you can measure matters, and not everything that matters can be measured, right? That sums that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I said. I mean, the way unfortunately, we become, and maybe it's because of the world that we live in now that's so heavy with computers and information mm-hmm. overload and all that. We want to push that on everything. But again, back to what I was saying, you can see, you and I could go down, or most firefighters probably could go down if they've been around for a while. I can see two companies deploy lines. Maybe they do it a couple times, or maybe even just once. And you can kind of tell, you can tell. Why am I saying kind of? You can tell who's really good at it and who isn't.
Yes.
You can see it, but the time may be a little off. So if this other company that cuts these corners is fast by, you know, they're 10 seconds faster than the company that's a little more methodical, is that company that cuts corners better than the other company? The data doesn't show you that, but you seeing it in real life, you can actually see that. And I mean, I'm not trying to, yeah, I guess it made me think of, you've seen you've seen the movie Moneyball, right?
Yeah, I love that movie.
I've never read the book. I don't know.
We've talked about this. I really want to read that book.
Yeah. And I don't know the exact story, but in the movie is what I'm talking about. There's a moment, it's a data-driven system, right? Which is interesting. I like the movie, and it's kind of, there's a little more than the data, right? It's a way of thinking about the game, is at least how it's presented in the movie, where you don't all just try and collect your best players. You're trying to collect the best team, right? To put these players together. And there's a point in the movie, and I can't remember the exact details, but basically they're using the system, and hey, this guy is what we need. This guy is what we need, right? He fits the bill, but he's creating problems in the locker room, right? And the team. And it's like was it Billy Bean, the general manager, recognizes that, and the other guy that is his assistant is saying, "No, man, we can't. This is not good. You can't get rid of this guy. He fits the profile of what we need." And he's like, "No, that's a problem." He ends up trading him. So even though they had this system that was backed up with data, there were still these things that went beyond just the numbers, that it was creating problems, and it was detrimental to the whole process and what they were trying to accomplish. So you can have data that justifies what you want to do, but there's still the human factor that data doesn't always show. And when you don't take that into account, that's where you start having these problems. So, I mean, I need to find that scene. It's a good one, but
yeah, it's a great movie. And it's funny. I feel like that movie's a weird one to bring up, because it could fight both of our cases. It could fight our point that systems will trump, certain things, that it's something that reliable that you can put in place, which is a great example of that movie. But it's funny that we're talking sort of negatively about data and measurement. And that's pretty much what his whole system was about, was looking at the numbers and playing those numbers. Yeah.
But I like it because I think it's real in the sense, because it looks at the human interaction of it, and where it is numbers, but you still have to take into account because even when you think about that, right? He had the players, but the coach at the certain, the manager or whatever, he wasn't playing the guys the way he should have. So there's that human aspect of all that stuff, where you can take the data, have all these things that justify it, but if you're not using it correctly, it's like you hear people throw it around all the time, and you and I have seen it in our careers, where you'll see someone will be heavy into data. They'll justify it at some of the upper levels of organizations to make a move or do something, move units, this, that, data, and in essence, they're just cherry picking the data that supports what they want to accomplish. And so what's it really worth if you're going to do that? So you have to be cautious of that.
So something to just keep going with this Moneyball reference for a second, is they asked the right questions. And I think that's important, is asking the right questions, which, leads you to search out the right data. So one of the big things about that is the administration, or the way things was all about, like you said, finding those big players that could get big numbers and hit home runs and all of that. And one of the lines they keep saying is like, what wins baseball games? What if you actually look at it, what wins baseball games? And he said, and I forget the character's name, but he said, people getting on base percentage. Essentially, if you break it all down, that's what wins baseball games, because then you get runs. You can have your big home run hitters and stuff, and it's probably good for marketing and putting butts in seats and things like that. But so is winning baseball games. And then that's what they keep coming back to, is what wins baseball games. And then they figured that out, and they said it's getting on base. So then they sort of centered everything around that, as like, how can we get more people on base? And so I find that part of it sort of interesting, is that they asked the right question, and the answer wasn't necessarily what you think. In baseball, it's, you could answer that, well, it's hitting home runs, it's solid defense, it's, all of these things. But they answered the question. They looked at it. It's getting on base. That's the answer. So they asked the right question to begin with. So if you are asking the wrong questions, then all of the data in the world doesn't matter, because it's answering the wrong question.
Yeah.
And so what is the question for the fire department? What is the question that everything should be in service to?
Bill, there's a lot. I mean, at least the way I'm thinking about it, it just depends on what you're talking about. There's a lot of slightly different questions. I mean, you just have fire has a whole bunch of questions. EMS has a whole bunch of questions. It's good to measure some things. I was thinking about it's funny, it made me think about remember the one time, and this isn't, we joked, they said it was science, but we were really getting kind of data in the sense of like human experience, like what were guys telling us and how they're really interacting with hose lines, right? Because we had this big discussion back and forth where we have 1 3/4 and 2-inch hose lines, right? Everyone's like, oh, 2-inch hose lines, man, they're so much harder to move and this and that. And there's like, I can't, and the 1 3/4 is easier. So we're like, is it really though? Because it doesn't seem like, my experience was, I'm not talking about flowing, because flowing is a different thing and people get confused about that. Like if we have a different tip on and we're flowing more GPM, we're going to get, that pressure coming back at us, and we have to manage that. We can have a bigger tip on a bigger line, right? But that's kind of different. Like people are talking about just physically moving the line around corners and stuff like that. And remember, we actually had the guys basically blindfolded and we made them move 1 3/4 and 2-inch around, like outside around some corners and stuff like that. And then ask them like, okay, so which one was this? Was this the 1 3/4 or is this the 2-inch? And they couldn't tell. In fact, some of the times they said the 2-inch was easier to move than the 1 3/4. I know it's not scientific, I guess, but it's real.
Yeah.
So that's like a human data where you go out, you tried something. That's to me a good way of looking at stuff, where you had that experience, you asked them what they thought it was, and there was no real difference in how they handled it or moved it, and there's no noticeable difference in the speed that they did things with either. So a lot of that was in their head. Then and it flushed that out, but that kind of stuff to me is, the data with, again, I guess it's not scientific. We're just talking about it, but you could say it was data. We could have set up a chart, had everyone in the fire department roll through and, which line is it, and figure out if they could tell what they rated it as far as harder or easier. I mean,
it just made me think I was trying to put my finger on, the difference, like with that experiential data. And I think we touched on this at some point, but they say there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And it's kind of a similar thing, where like data that is just sort of distant from experience, it's just knowledge. Like you can know something intellectually without really having experienced its reality.
Yes.
Like I know Africa exists, but I've never been there, so I don't know that Africa exists. I haven't set foot on its soil, and this is sort of the same thing. You can know something at an administrative level and see it on a spreadsheet and see data, but you don't really know it until you've experienced it and seen how it interacts with reality. Because in a scientific experimental laboratory setting, so to speak, there's only so many variables. That's the whole point, right? That's part of the scientific method is controlling your variables. Well, in reality, there's unlimited variables, and it's something we don't account for. Now, I'm not saying there's like data, metrics, measuring things. It's not all bad. That's not what I'm saying. It's about asking the right questions. It's about what you do with that if you actually get results, and then trying your best to sort of meet that middle ground of experiential and intellectual.
Yeah. I mean, it's, we've seen stuff where companies have been moved around and stuff. And I'm sure a lot of departments have experienced this. And it's like, well, why are they moved around? And a lot of times, if you're a firefighter that's been around for a while, the best locations for apparatus just by, just your understanding of what's going on, how long it takes them to get there, because you actually feel that, experience that in real life. And sometimes things are used to justify moves that don't really make sense. You're trying to move this company from one area to another, and you're saying, well, we run a lot more suppression calls over here, so we need to move them there. But then when you look at it, you're like, wait a minute, you're saying more suppression calls, but that's because there's more brand new buildings with fire alarms that malfunction. But you're moving it away from the single family and the townhouses that have, more potential for fires where we need units there quicker. It's kind of one of those examples. It's kind of one of those things. It's like, well, it's not the numbers when you're looking at it. You're just saying, oh, I have more calls over here that are suppression related. Yeah, but those are calls where the sprinkler systems are going to, hold the fire and check. And yes, everything could malfunction, but it's not the exception. It's what the rule is most of the time, where that's usually the case, versus this area that has a greater potential when there is a fire for people to need action on our part a lot quicker, a lot sooner. So again, it's like, okay, well, did we really drill down and look at the information, and was that the correct reason? And it may be unrelated to that. There may be other factors, and that's the case. And some of those moves to me were, yeah, they made sense because it wasn't just, but that was a reason cited. And you're like, that's not probably the best reason to cite. Maybe you should cite these other reasons because of its better running routes and this and, stuff like that. Again, it's not just the pure data, it's these other factors that we can't get so caught up on just one thing. So yeah, I mean,
when do you think this started happening? Because this hasn't been, this whole like data collection and measuring thing. This hasn't been around for.
I think it's just because like I said, technology has become so much easier to collect stuff. I mean,
I think that's true too. But don't you think there's been a little bit of a paradigm shift in administrative mindset as well?
Yeah, but I just think it's the availability of it, man. If something's available and there's a greater chance people are going to use it. I mean, think about dispatching stuff. I mean, I don't know. I know there's national standards for like units on scene or this or that. But again, what is that taking into account? I mean, someone has a stomach ache and everything has the potential to be something else. I get that. But most of the time it's just a stomach ache, right? Or you know what I'm saying? So we're worried about hitting this certain time to get units there. So then we'll put, units that may not need to go on the road. You'll put an engine company on that because the ambulance isn't going to get there within this amount of time. But did it really matter? It matters for some number you want to hit that means something else, that maybe that's why you can't get a grant or something, all these other things that matter. But it's kind of this cascading problem that it's just, well, we're doing this to do this, to do this. And does it really make sense? And some of it's way beyond even the department level. Obviously, it's nationally how you measure some of this stuff. And it's unfortunate. So if you're one of the people listening and one day you end up at one of those levels that can, determine some of that stuff, be realistic. Don't buy in. But
here's the problem, and that's what I'm saying here is that I've seen the rise of a new kind of chief, which is that administrative chief that maybe moved through the ranks too quickly, was never big in the firehouse, wasn't big operationally, and was just trying to get to that desk job as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And for that kind of chief, and we see more of those kinds these days than we ever did. Chiefs used to be firemen. They were firemen that moved up through the ranks. They were battalion chiefs. Maybe they were in the street. They knew how to connect with the guys. They knew the reality of the street. And then, they got that white shirt and they got a desk, but they still were connected to the street. We're seeing more chiefs that never really established that connection to the reality of the street, and then they're making decisions. So it's no wonder that they go for it's almost like they avoid contact with the street personnel, right? Because and what's easier to prove their point if they can't prove it because of what the voice of the people say? What are they going to prove it with? They're going to prove it with data, and data is easy, and I can and these days it's you know. It's valid for some reason. If you show data, I'm pointing here with my finger. If you show data, then it must be valid, right? Because it can be measured. You can't measure that experience and the reality. But I guess that's kind of the point I was making, is that I see more chiefs these days that it makes sense to me why they rely on data so much, because it's something easy for them to produce behind their desk without having to talk to somebody.
Yeah, because I think it's harder to explain all the different reasons for things. It's easier to show someone a graph. And I guess, some of this may go back to funding. Again, I'm not operating at that level. I understand that's hard because I guess at the upper levels of departments, they're dealing with budgets and, the city hall may not understand that. They don't understand necessarily. They don't understand our job. They kind of maybe have an idea, but they truly don't understand day to day. And it's hard to justify certain things without, because people are so dependent on it nowadays with data, seeing that cool graph or that chart, or it just relates to dollar signs or time on scene, or how quickly you get there. Like, it's all those things that I guess you really have to be good at explaining the details of it all and making it somewhat, I don't know, I guess just understandable for people that don't understand our job, because I'm sure that's part of this. Now that I think about it, that filters into it. I get, it's, I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's not going away. We got to interact with it, but we got to be smart about how we interact with it, and don't think, I guess the problem is a lot of times we think data is just good without understanding the context of what it is. And I don't know, that's the heart of it all, right? I mean, that's pretty much what we're getting at, I think.
Yeah. And also, I think another thing to understand is that data by itself doesn't produce results,
Yeah.
And
or good results. I mean, you could say you could get a unit there in a certain amount of time, but
that's really just more data.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's like, well, is that the right unit? Or they could have been doing something else of value. It's these weird things where you can't really explain all of it if you're just looking at numbers. I mean, because dispatching is one of those things I think that's gotten wild too, where there's a lot more computers involved, and a lot of dispatch systems will start sending units before you have the full picture, all the information, because they have, again, this data collection and metrics that they have to get things out at a certain time, but the whole picture isn't there. And it's the same thing, on an incident. Sometimes you just got to slow down, take a second, look at what's going on, just pause, and then make a decision. And the problem with some of these dispatch systems where they just send stuff, they're not taking that pause to see what's going on. And I don't know. It's just, I feel like the human, at least I've noticed over the years, removing the human factor has not made dispatch better. I haven't seen that result. It's kind of gone in the other way.
Absolutely the other way. Because
it's again,
make dispatching human again.
Yeah. Cause it's like, if you're not pushing yourself, it's hard to maintain or get better at something, right? And you think about the all these apps we have, the driving apps. I mean, I think people don't know their areas as well.
That's true. Yeah,
because
that's a big one.
You have these, the apps that'll give you the address and the route, and it's in and of itself, that's a good thing. But if you rely on that and don't know your area, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know, man.
Another thing I was just thinking about while you're talking on is, again, so maybe some of the data is useful, especially on the operational side. So I think about something like search, right? And I was just thinking of a lieutenant we both know that I remember would say this often, is he would say, and I don't know the exact percentage, but there's basically a higher percentage of victims are found by doors and windows.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's great to know.
That's good
That's
information.
actually
Yeah.
useful. But knowing that in itself does not make you perform a better search.
No.
Right? So you imagine, you got a fresh rookie out of academy, and we're doing a drill on, search, and you grab them by the collar and you say, all right, now we're going to go in there and search. And remember, whatever it is, 85% of victims are found by doors and windows. Go.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that help a little bit? Yeah. But so what do you do with that? How do you actually put that into your, how do you put that into your bones so that you search better with that knowledge? Well, you have to train them how to find a door, what to do when you find a door, how to search behind an open or closed door immediately, how to do sweeps, how to sort of process, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's another step involved. So that is actually a useful statistic, but there's another step involved. Knowing that statistic is not helpful in and of itself. You have to do something with that information, right?
Yeah, it's part of the story. It's not the whole story.
Right.
And a lot of people make the data collection the whole story.
End all be all.
And it can't be. It's another tool. It's another.
Yeah. And there's an old joke. It's like 85% of all statistics are made up. Right. And you say that and you're like, well, how do I know that statistic's not one of the ones that's made up?
Yeah. It's, it's,
but it's true. I mean, and there's some really useful stuff that comes, and maybe this is a good transition to talk about data collection and things like that. So, a lot of the stuff that NIST does, and a lot of the studies of LODDs, things like that, there's some useful information there. But again, and I'm glad that as a department as a whole, we're getting better at collecting this stuff. Mm-hmm. And now, even still, I think that can go off the rails.
Oh bit. Yeah, because it doesn't tell the whole story.
It does, and like the whole investigation, and it's insane. But again, like the point is not to just know that, or to just study it, or just to have, this percentage of LODDs is because of this. What do I do with that information, and how do I process that to a point that it's in my hands when I work? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it has to be coupled with, I think, after kind of talking about this, I think what's occurred to me is that any kind of data collection has to be coupled with the human experience of beyond just the numbers. And when you detach those two things, when you're just looking at data, okay, maybe it's helpful, but we're missing something. When you're just looking at like your experience, maybe that's helpful, but you're missing something. And that's actually the good side of data collection, is when you can merge those two things together. And going back to the hose line thing, where it's human experience, but we did do a little unofficial data collection to see, like, hey, put the guys through and see which one can you tell is this 2-inch or is this 1 3/4? And they, we put those together and we figured out you really can't tell. It comes down to actually if you're on the nozzle and flowing, that's where you notice it. It's not the weight of the line you're moving 20, 30 feet back from the nozzle. It's the issue is the nozzle, and you can see that, and you understand why, because you understand the numbers of, flowing 185 GPMs versus 265 and what that does. I mean, so yeah, it's putting the two together. When they come uncoupled and they're just by themselves, I think that's when we get into problems. I'm more skeptical of numbers just by themselves than, someone's experience, but that, people's experience could even be skewed. So I guess I just wanted to talk about now, switch as far as how to interact with this, right? Because you're going to have stuff from higher levels come at you for different, groups and committees and stuff like that. So how do you interact with that? How do you navigate that world? And I think it starts with, you have to ask, how are they using it? And where are they getting it from? Like, where's it coming from? Like, how do they collect it? You have to understand how they're getting that information. And then what is the reason they're using it for? You're going to have to ask questions. And it's good to maybe push back a little, obviously respectfully, and just point out issues with maybe how they were getting it or using it. And if there's some holes in that, respectfully say like, hey, well, I don't think it doesn't consider this. What about this, this situation here, or how do we apply it? Stuff like that. I mean, I think that's important, right? I mean,
I think so. And yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously on this podcast about leadership, we have to be respectful about it. But in my experience, sometimes you have to go a little beyond being respectful, and some people need a slap in the face sometimes, and you need to grab them and wake them up back into reality. And I've had to do that a few times and again, I'm joking. You have to do it in a relatively respectful way, but truly some people get so blinded by this stuff. Sometimes you kind of have to wake them up a little bit and say, hey, look, here's where I'm coming from. Okay. I hear what you're saying, but let me tell you about my experience and how this plays out, and kind of open their eyes to, and a lot of times it's people who don't get an opportunity to see what we see.
Yeah.
So you're really just giving them some perspective. Now, whether they listen to you or not, that's a conversation for a different day. But yes, I agree with you. I think it is important to, as much as you can, help push things from the bottom up and not always just accept things top down.
Yeah. And if you're at a level above, a lot of times if you're the chief or you're an officer in charge of a committee or even firefighters, and however that works, ask the lowest levels how it actually, I don't know, how things actually affect them at the lowest level. If you're trying to come up with a new way of doing something or using resources or, something with training where it's like, hey, well, we did this and these were the times, and as far as training, this is how things went, and we think we should do it this way. Go talk to a few people at the lowest level of how there are people that implement this and say, well, what do you think? Do you think this actually reflects reality? And if a few of those people say no, then you're like, okay, maybe we need to look at this more than just this set of data. So that's the other side to it. If you're at the upper levels of that collection, ask the people actually that are going to implement whatever decisions come from it, how that's going to affect them. And if there's a problem there, you gotta look into that. But don't fall for the voodoo of data.
Voodoo.
You have to, I guess, because what happens is sometimes it disarms common sense, right? Like we talked about, you can see something and you're like, that
disarms common sense.
It does. I mean, that's kind of what it does, right?
Yeah.
It disarms common sense sometimes because you're like, well, the data said it. And you're like, but that's not the experience on the ground, running the calls or implementing that tactic or that strategy. That's not how it works. So don't let it disarm common sense. You got to balance it out and, have those conversations and ask questions about it. Like you said, maybe you push back a little. You just say, hey, why, where's it coming from? How do we get this? Why are we collecting this? What benefit is it? And those aren't bad questions. Those are reasonable questions if they're done the right way.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say too, that I'm not naive. I get that there's a threshold sort of that's in my mind. That's kind of how I see, there's the blue shirts and the white shirts, and there's sort of a threshold in between. And there's some things that I won't understand about the administration at the street level. And there's certain data that has to be collected and followed that makes sense at an administrative level. And I might just have to accept that at my level as, look, this is what's going on. And there's also some things that doesn't need to break that threshold that can stay at the street level that we need to understand and doesn't really affect the administration at all. But there's some crossover there, and I guess that administration can't always listen to our feedback and incorporate it. They got to balance it, but they shouldn't never listen to it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a broad term, administration. Sometimes it's like one person. Sometimes it depends. As we talked about there, there's a tug of war. You got to, the people running an organization have people they probably have to answer to, and that's usually at a city level. And those people, again, like I said, don't necessarily understand our job, and it's easier to show graphs and charts and talk about money and everything else. The results of how the calls play out is much harder, and that's probably why data is leaned on so much in today's world, because it's really hard to quantify the successful, fire operations or EMS operations, because there's just it's not easy to explain unless you know what you're seeing or you experience it. You're one of the people that we've helped or, made a difference, saving part of their house or something like that. I mean, those are the people that can see that. But when you're not there, that's really hard to explain to people. And it's much easier to give someone numbers than it is to, maybe sell the experience. And maybe that's what we have to do. Maybe, just thinking out loud, maybe sometimes interacting with, if you're the reason you're going to implement something, you have the data, but maybe you also tell the story. You tell the story of what, this does as far as, okay, so the data says this, but this is actually the experience. Tell the story of situations of, a fire, or that doesn't bear out what this is saying, or a few of them, or maybe it does. Maybe you're giving data and you're also saying that, hey, this tactic or this strategy that in training, it shows it works. And then, hey, we had these recent experiences and this is what happened. And so again, it all comes down to take the data, but you have to couple it with the human experience. And when you do that, it works. When you detach those two things, especially when data is just operating by itself, I think it becomes a problem. It's just, it doesn't bear out the true story. So couple it with the human experience. When that's balanced, I think you get the best information, and probably can help everyone a lot more that way. I don't know.
Yeah. I was just thinking, there's a little story. There's, I think this is relevant for the data collection. There's this citizen that comes to our firehouse every once in a while.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. What's the nicest way to put this? I don't know, on a podcast. She's crazy.
Yeah.
Like clinically probably, but
yeah.
Anyway, she's crazy, and she comes to our firehouse and she talks to us, and she's very frenetic and worked up, and she's obsessed with data collection.
Yeah.
And she has all these maps. I mean, she shows up and she's got this file folder and papers are falling on, and she says, "I demand to talk to somebody about this."
Yeah.
And then she shows us this paper, and it's got this map, and she's like, "I need to know all the calls that this department has run year to date. Because I have some locations here that I've noticed that calls are being run." And then she says, "I've made up these numbers, but I want to show them to the mayor because I think that blah blah blah." Yeah. Anyways, we got one of our guys to talk to her once, and he was just sort of playing the game, I guess, and printed all this stuff and gave it to her. Well, she loved that, and now every time she comes to the firehouse, she wants to talk to him, which is all the better. But one of the funny things about that is he gave her a chart of like the hierarchy of the organizational thing, the organizational chart, right? The org chart. Yeah. And of course, and I think this is true of most departments, the org chart has the citizens on the top. Yeah. Well, that was the last thing we needed to tell this woman, because now she comes to our firehouse and says, "Technically, I'm your boss." And we're all like, "Yeah, technically that's true." Yeah. So, anyways, that's a funny instance of like data gone wrong.
Data and human factor collide. Bad on both ends. So, I don't know, man. It's just something to flush out. I mean, I think we've kind of...
we talk about it a lot. There's going to be a lot more to talk about. Yeah, it's something we have to deal with, and I think
cautionary kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right in saying that. I think one of the main takeaways is to go that extra step. Whether that's to raise your perspective up the ranks and do the best you can, or whether that's to do that extra step to figure out what do I do with this information, and then I mean, and I guess like we said, there's a certain part of this that we just have to accept is how everything works now. Not just the fire department, and it's gonna be around, and we have to deal with it. And I think our responsibility to it is to to deal with it in the best way that we can and not get kind of sucked into the voodoo, as you said, so let's arm ourselves against the voodoo of data.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it really, to sum it up, it's if you're at the upper level, as far as whatever that is, collecting the data or using it to implement something, before you do that, ask the lowest level, ask the people on the street about concerns about how, maybe we got the information, got the data, or what it means for the implementation. Ask them and then make that decision. Just don't blindly go on the data. And if you're the person at the, the lowest levels and you see some of this stuff and you realize there's some problems with it, then, bring that to the upper level attention, but be reasonable about it and don't be emotional and just say, hey, look, there's a problem with this. The way you collected this doesn't make sense, or this doesn't bear out with actually how things work out. Maybe you should take a second look. If those two sides work together and then, data and the human side of it are together and not uncoupled, I think you can make it all work. But if it doesn't, if it ventures outside of that, I guess that formula, I just said, I think that's when we have problems, and that's what you need to be aware of.
All right. Well, that sounds good. I said this. There may be a data part 2 episode down the road, because we talk about this a lot, and there's a lot of specific instances that that come up about this. But I think that's a really good sort of overview of our conversations we've had about it and our take on it. You got anything else for the episode before we close out?
No, that's it. I mean, as far as the episode, but I just want to say, check out the membership on firegroundcompany.com. That's really where we tackle the hardest questions of leadership, the how of leadership, not the data, but the real human side, how to talk to people, how to deal with problems, how to make decisions under stress and incidents. That's where we flush all that out in detail, the how, which is the hardest question, I think. So check that out. Fireground Company membership at firegroundcompany.com.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for stopping by. Check us out at firegroundcompany.com. You'll find links to all our social media accounts and our YouTube channel, and you'll stay up to date on everything we're working on. We also have a store on our website where you can support us as we grow this community, plus working on some great courses to help you strengthen your leadership in the fire department and support its traditions and culture. Last but not least, subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, leave a comment, spread the word, get this out to the firefighters who are hungry to make the job even better.
The Fireground Company Podcast.